Ladies and gentlemen, this is a video. Let's talk about the PS4 Neo and the Xbox One Scorpio, or whatever they end up really being called when they finally emerge on store shelves. So, too long didn't read of both consoles is they are significantly more powerful than their predecessors. In the case of the PS4, it's roughly 2.25 times faster. In the case of the Xbox One, you're looking at around 4 times the difference of the vanilla machine. So, immediately, you might be a little concerned from the perspective of games developers. Essentially, if you think about it, that's a lot of horsepower difference, and so folks are starting to voice those concerns and say, well, does that mean that if you own a vanilla machine, you're going to get hosed? If you own the upgraded hardware, is there not really going to be that much of a difference? And does it mean, from the perspective of developers, the developmental time is either going to be longer, or does it mean that it's going to be considerably harder? Well, developers have already started to comment on this and started to speculate. The folks over at BioWare, a while ago, actually gave a quote that said that they believe it's going to be a giant pain in the ass from the perspective of consoles. For example, they talked about the original Xbox. Microsoft didn't actually tell anyone that there were different DVD drives in different models of the Xbox, as I guess depending on the availability of those drives at the time. Now, this meant that there were performance differences between the two systems, and it wasn't just a case of loading times either. For example, it could be that if you're trying to texture stream, one drive would be absolutely fine because it was able to keep up with that amount of data transfer, and another one wouldn't. These are not, this is not quotes, by the way, but I'm giving examples. So his quote is that they didn't tell anyone that, but as a developer you discovered that you have different performances, and sometimes you'd have these boxes of refurbished drives and different brands and different equipment, and it can cause incredible variability. Other developers are less concerned regarding the technical differences between the systems. For example, Kenny Linder recently spoke on NeoGAF. He was a former employee of Sony UK studio by the name of Big, and he said that, yep, that would be the main issues lie, and this is in terms of quality assurance, additional TCRs and testing requirements. By the way, TCR means technical certification requirements, and that could well mean that you're going to need to make sure that you're going to need to get the game certified across different SKUs. So for example, normally all you need to do is, okay, it works properly on the PS4. Well, now you've got to worry about the Neo version as well. However, in terms of actually the workload on the hardware itself, he said it's no different than working on the PC or mobile, which makes a lot of sense. For example, if you're developing on the mobile phone and you're playing a game, a lot of titles, they have different quality settings because you might be running let's say the latest Samsung Galaxy, whereas your friend might be running a cheap regular phone which just doesn't have the horsepower, the CPU, the GPU, the RAM, whatever it is. And even on consoles, of course, between the Xbox One and the PS4, there's different quality differences. For example, internal rendered resolution, quality of shadows, texture quality, lighting quality, frame rate, and so on. Now, about 2 years ago, I put together an article which is named, and I quote, "Resolution and frame rates, how do they work? What's their impact on games?" I'll put a link in the video description if you're particularly interested in it. And it goes in to show how much extra work a GPU, or the system as a whole, needs to do if you're just bumping up the resolution. For example, 720p, which is a resolution of 1280 by 720, has a total pixel count of 921,600. 1408 by 792, which is the intermediary resolution between 1600 and 900 and 720p, actually has a major difference in pixel count. You're looking at just over 20% higher. Meanwhile, if you were to go from, let's say, 1080p to 1440p, you're looking at 2 million-ish pixels for 1080p, whereas it's about 3.6 million for 1440p. That's 2560 by 1440. By the way, to get these numbers, you literally just multiply. So, for example, 1280 times 720, for those of you who are unsure. That alone, 1440p versus 1080p is about 1.78 times the difference. That's gargantuan. You're looking at almost 2 times the performance. What I'm saying is that hardware performance can get gobbled up really fast. Frame rate is another one. Frame rate is pretty much a case of the higher the frame rate, the less time the GPU has to calculate the next frame of animation. So 30 frames a second gives you twice the amount of time per frame to render compared to, let's say, 60 frames a second. And 120 frames a second requires, once again, massive improvement. It's basically doubles. Now, in the case of 30 FPS, you've got 33.3 milliseconds. 60 FPS, 16.6. And of course, that math continues. So, for example, 120, you've got about 8 milliseconds. My point being that hardware can get really, really bogged down. And honestly speaking, I think developers are not going to have big problems. What they're probably going to do, and we'll have to wait until developers start to release more information. I'm still trying to do more research on this behind the scenes. And the main reason I'm putting this video together is because some people have been asking me my opinions on it. So I want to give my initial thoughts. But I feel that the most likely scenario is they're going to target the high-end machine first for that chosen platform. So, for sake of argument, we'll stick with the PlayStation because we know more about the specifications of that. So they'll say, okay, the processor about 2.1 gigahertz, its RAM is that speed, the GPU is that speed. Let's target that. So they'll get, let's say, the resolution, the frame rate tied down, and then it's just a case of figuring out what elements of the game are best cut for the regular version of the PS4. For example, it could be they decide, you know, we can't sacrifice frame rate because it's a fighting game. Or we can't sacrifice frame rate because it's a spectacle fighter and we need it to be 60 FPS. It doesn't feel right if it's 30. Or maybe they say to themselves, hey, you know what, the frame rate is okay, so we can cut that, and that immediately frees up half the GPU performance. So we don't really need to do that much more to get the performance we need. So all we'll do is we'll cut the lighting a little bit here, and we'll reduce the, I'd say, the shadow quality there. We're good. So essentially, it'd almost be like graphical settings. Various shaders, various graphical shaders, various resolution options will be loaded accordingly. And it's very much like if you load Doom up, for example, on the PC, and you might have, for example, a GTX 970 or an R9 390. Your friend might have, on the other hand, a GTX 960. Obviously, you're going to be able to play with high resolution or better graphical quality, maybe better anti-aliasing compared to them. And you might decide that you want to deal with, you don't mind the frame rate occasionally dipping to 50 FPS on your machine. They might, on the other hand, even if they have the same GPU as you, say, no, I need 60 to 70 FPS minimum. And there were folks, and this is going way back in the day, this is like Quake 3 era stuff, which, if you remember back then, especially if you're playing online, especially for cable modem users, what they would do is they would choose really low resolutions, or they would have higher resolution but take all of the graphics options off. So it basically looked like a pile of shit. And they would go with like 2D objects rather than 3D object pickups, remove a lot of the shadowing and God knows what else. And the reason behind that is because they wanted the highest highest frame rate possible, so that they had those twitch reactions. And this is going back quite a bit, if a game is being targeted towards the PC as well, so for example, the Xbox is pretty golden here because developers will, of course, at least according to the latest rumours, most likely be creating games on the Windows 10 PC platform as well as the Xbox platform. Essentially what they can do is they can just almost figure out what level of hardware best corresponds to the best graphics options, and they're pretty much good to go, because if they were producing the game for, let's say, the PC anyway, they would obviously have to create assets at higher resolution, and that might be the only slight issue, because when you start dealing with, let's say, for the sake of argument, paint yourself a scene in your mind. Let's say it's a street scene, and let's say that you are on a rooftop, right? So it's daytime, so you've got pretty good visibility. If you want, you can think of a game like Crackdown or Grand Theft Auto, if you lack imagination, or Infamous Second Son. You know, where you've got that sprawling city in the background, and then you've got certain elements that you would not be able to normally see. So, for example, it might be billboards all the way over the side of the screen, which you would not normally be able to access. It's across a river or what have you, and you shouldn't be able to get there. Well, the developers might have to decide to create those assets at higher resolution. Similarly, you might also have to create other assets, for example, cars, the geometry in the wheels, or let's say, the skeleton of different models, or the textures as a whole, like even things like the graffiti and the trees and other elements which go into the world. They may have to create those in higher detail if it was a console exclusive, let's say for the PlayStation 4, because if they are targeting, once again, high levels of detail, not just better quality higher quality resolution or better resolution or faster frame rates, but I think for the most part it's really going to come down to the developer. So for example, if you're putting together a game like Resogun, which obviously was one of the PS4's launch titles and looked pretty damn gorgeous, had some nice physics in there, nice lighting, but honestly, how much more could they have done with the game? I mean, yeah, they might have done a little more with the physics, maybe done a little more here and there, but what probably would have happened is if that would have instead, let's say for example, in this alternate world, the PS4 and the PS4 Neo had launched both simultaneously, what probably would have happened is that they would have simply gone with maybe a few extra objects on screen, maybe a few extra things breaking, but overall they probably would have stuck to the fairly similar graphical stylings and just increased the internal resolution of the game just to make it look a lot nicer. So what I'm saying is, I don't think that this is going to mean that we're going to get massive increases in development time for game studios. It might mean, however, that artists, especially who are creating textures, may have to, if they're creating console exclusives, may have to put in a little extra work, and it's probably going to be more quality assurance stuff. So, for example, if a developer feels that the install base of the vanilla PS4 is too big and the Neo isn't really catching on, then the Neo version might not do everything that it should to really impress you graphically. I hope that makes sense. In other words, they just might not put the work in. So, for example, it might just look essentially like a higher resolution version of the vanilla game. But unfortunately, we don't know what's going to happen. But those are my initial thoughts. Anyway, let me know your thoughts on this very topic. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.